Well, I'm going to jump in if that's okay with you all, and we may have some other people trickle in as we get started here, but thanks for coming to this session. I saw that we have, well, let me see if I can remember. So we've got some Biola and Seattle Pacific, Fresno Pacific, Azusa Pacific, Westmont. I think we have a large Westmont contingent. Did I miss anybody? Any other schools represented? Good. I'm impressed with how many different schools are here. Come on in, guys. Good to see you. What school are you from? Put you on the spot right away. Biola. Okay. Good. Well, my name's Sarah Visser, and I'm a faculty member at Azusa Pacific University. I chair the Department of Leadership and Organizational Psychology there. So I spend a lot of time teaching org behavior and change processes, and I'm really interested in things like how do we develop leaders. And before that, I've been, hi guys, come on in. There's a bit of a line. One moment. Come on in. Sorry. No, you're good. You're good. There's a bit of a line. We're going to give him a minute. Okay. There's a couple seats over on this side, too. All right. You guys can use those, too, if you're comfy, wherever you want. All right. Are we good? Did you all like walk single file over here too? It's kind of impressive. So I was just saying, for those of you who just joined us, my name's Sarah Visser. I'm a faculty member at Azusa Pacific University, and I teach leadership and organizational psychology there. And I've been there about 5 years. Before that, I spent most of my professional career in the student affairs. So most recently, I was an associate dean of students at Pomona College, which is here in Southern California, one of the Claremont colleges, which is a small consortium of 5 undergraduate institutions. So I've spent a lot of time among student leaders. I've spent a lot of time in different cultural and campus dynamics. And the one thing that I find that not a lot of people have a ton of experience talking about is class. And yet I see social class as something that intersects so many different points of campus life and student experiences. And so several years ago when Glenn was talking about SCORR and saying, hey, we want you to come out and do some things, he said, do you have any experience talking about this? And I said, no, but we should. So today what we're going to do is we're going to spend quite a bit of time watching some videos. And I want to show you these video segments because it was put together through PBS. It's a video called People Like Us. And I'm just going to show you 2 segments from that video. And I think it helps us kind of enter the conversation and be able to unpack the dynamics of social class. But before we jump into that, I want to know, in the room, what do you think social class is? How would you define it? And I'm going to capture some on the whiteboard, so feel free to just yell out your ideas.
Mannerism.
Mannerisms. What else? Okay, economic status. Location. Keep them coming. Profession. Sorry, I couldn't hear that. What we consume. Okay. What else?
Social capital.
Social capital. Does everybody know what that is?
No.
Okay. So if you think of capital as like money, right? Social capital would be how you trade in social situations, right? So knowledge that you have. So I think of it as kind of like a bank. Like how do you know how to navigate certain social situations, what's expected, how you make exchanges in social settings. Okay, other things? Context.
Mobility and accessibility.
Yep. Anything else?
Education.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? So class is this really simple thing, right? There's a lot of different ways of approaching it. At the very beginning of this video I'm going to show you, they show a quote, and I put it up here so that you can actually think about it a little bit before you just hear it. It says, America is a nation of tribes. They're the people we live amongst, the people with similar backgrounds to us, the people we feel most comfortable with. Our tribes can be defined by what we do and how much we make, and also by our opportunities and aspirations. As we move through life, we separate ourselves, often unconsciously, from people who don't fit into our group, into our social class. America is a country divided by class. Class is everywhere, yet it's often hard to see. In the great game of social class, we're all players. So I'm going to show you these two segments. The first one is called The Trouble with Tofu, and the second one is called Don't Get Above Your Raisin. And I think they explore it from a little bit different angle, each of them. So once we've watched that, we'll have some a chance to debrief that a bit. So feel free to take notes if there are things that jump out at you, because we are going to discuss it a little bit after. Okay? Okay, I'm going to bring us back together, just in the interest of time, so we can keep moving forward. Thanks for engaging in such good dialogue together. The first question I want us to talk about as a large group is this one. How did people in the film talk about and define social class? What did you hear depicted in their stories? Okay, so money was certainly a key thing, but not everything, right? Good, what else? What was that? Okay, so where you come from? Okay, right. So maybe where you come from both geographically, but also kind of family context, cultural context. Sure, what else?
A state of mind.
Okay, all right. And you heard some people even define it that way, right? I think class is a state of mind. What else?
What you eat.
Okay, what you eat, right? So you had the lady going, yuck, with the bread at the beginning, right?
And other people were just like, you have to get your belly.
Right, right. How else am I going to get this belly, right? What else? Values? Hmm?
Yeah, it was anything from like education to what you eat to the place you live in.
Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, in some ways it was all encompassing, right? What about any faith? Did you hear any faith context? Hmm? Yeah.
I definitely heard like someone use like how you serve other people.
Okay.
It's not like directly a faith thing.
Okay. Okay. Right. Okay, so it has context for us when we hear serve, the word service or serve. Mm-hmm. Good. Where else, how else did you see that referenced? Yeah.
Losing culture that would represent losing your Christian way.
Okay.
And so like you're going outside of that and like becoming unruly and
Right.
stuff like that.
Right. So in the second film, you heard them kind of, I don't remember what his title was, if he was a community member or a pastor or whatever he was in that community, but talking about when people step away, that people felt, in essence, like you were stepping away from your spiritual roots, your Christian identity, and that you might become worldly and somehow lose that part of who you are, right? So there's even intersections with the religious faith. Let's talk specifically about the first film, The Trouble with Tofu, if you can recall it. What do you think bread symbolized? Other than bellies.
I felt it was more traditional,
Okay.
and it kind of just defined way more than what it just was food, but like it defined like how you thought and how you judged other people.
Okay. Okay. So people got really animated, right, on all sides of the issue, right?
Right, because it was used to symbolize your position in society.
Okay. So something that we think, well, yeah, people eat bread every day. Deeply held beliefs and viewpoints and opinions, right? Yeah.
Preference and your ability to decide something for yourself versus
Okay.
someone else telling you.
Okay.
So it's sort of dynamics of power.
Yeah, yeah, there was a lot of that kind of autonomy conversation that was happening in those council board meetings and in the community forums and things like that, where it was all about whose decision is it to decide where I buy my bread, what kind of bread I buy, those kind of things. So yeah, power, absolutely.
It kind of shows how people place their value, because some people were like, look at the white bread, like the older woman, just like, ew, yuck, and then some people, like, that's all they wanted to buy.
Right, right. So, and you could see how people were making judgments. So beyond even just values, they were assigning judgment to it, right? Other hands about bread? So in a lot of ways, bread symbolized everything we've already been talking about in terms of what class is or what it represents. What did the councilman mean about being invisible? Remember, he was kind of debriefing what he was hearing in those forums and community meetings, and he talked about this issue of invisibility. What do you think he meant?
That in the people who lived in that town felt already predisposed to not being heard out because of their high school or middle school tradition. And that was the first time that they were, or that was the next time they were experiencing a higher class interaction. And so them getting this other market imposed on them, feeling like, oh, we have to listen to them and they're better than us because they can afford this, they can have healthier ways of living, and our stuff isn't worth.
Right. So there was almost like an assigned judgment in there, right? There was different levels they felt valued or non-valued. So what happens if people don't feel valued? He equated that to this idea of invisibility. And then he talked about how if you feel invisible in a culture, you kind of, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, I wrote down that you don't feel comfortable in your own skin.
Right, right. So it's almost like it's self-perpetuating, right? And it perpetuates within the culture, right? So I'm interested in this in particular as we think about campus contexts, right? Can you envision ways that people, and we're not going to talk about this publicly right now, but can you envision ways that people on your campus have either talked about feeling invisible or being invisible? Perhaps you yourself have experienced some of that. And sometimes I think we have a victim mentality where we kind of blame the victim and see that as a deficit thing, like, well, that's in their head, and if they would just come out of the shadows, if they feel invisible, then make themselves known. And I think I like the way the councilman complicated that a little bit, right? That it's not that easy, that it kind of self-perpetuates within cultures. I think that's really interesting to think about the different types of ways that people on our campuses might feel invisible and about our roles in that, right, Stu?
Well, the other thing I would say too is that it's how it continues to perpetuate is that there's also, it's about, there's a power dynamic.
That's right.
And so if you feel invisible, sure, one approach would be I'm going to try to do something to be visible. But there's also often, I think, an anger about the fact that you're invisible. And so there's often a choice of, well, I don't want to participate in it then. So
Right.
my response is I'm going to react against it.
Right.
Because I'm angry with people.
Sure, sure. And that if I did choose to participate, who's to say that it would be taken seriously or heard or valued, which again might foster even more anger, right? Are you raising your
I
hand?
was going to say like something very similar.
Something similar. Okay, okay. So I want to go to the next one, and we're going to keep talking about these ideas. In the don't get above your raisin, do you think somebody can be a member of more than one class? That's not a good question because it's a yes or no answer. I'd like for you to expound upon your answers to that question. Yeah.
I don't think easily, like the girl said, I don't remember her name, she said she didn't fit in either. And
Okay.
then once she made the decision to go to college, it was making the decision to remove herself from any sort of class. And she was kind of drifting between. So I think it might be possible, but it would take a lot of work and a lot of being really vulnerable with people to try to still, if not be a member of it, at least coexist well within it.
Right. Yeah.
I think the fact that you have, if you're part of more than one class, like that girl was feeling, you kind of create your own class,
Okay.
and that
It's like a
those other
third
people's-
place kind of thing.
Right. Those other people that are also part of two classes join that class, kind of thing. So it almost creates a whole other class.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think I agree it would be hard, but at the same time, you kind of create your own class and have to deal with that.
Yeah. In the back.
I wonder if there's such a thing as like class switching. Like, it seemed like I guess with the girl in the Grayson one that she was able to kind of just like switch back and forth. Maybe not as successfully as when she was back home,
Okay.
but it's like even with like just like what she was wearing, it's like she was
Yeah.
able to wear like overalls and a tank top in one place, and then like be able to go and work in DC and go to the nice restaurants with her friends and like dress in a whole
Yeah.
like suit and outfit.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's actually a whole body of like theory and literature that looks at that. It's called code switching. And we actually all code switch all the time, right? So here I am working with you today. I'm going to go home and have a birthday party for my 9-year-old daughter tonight. I won't be engaging quite the same way, right? I'm going to code switch when I'm hanging out with my kids. I'm going to code switch when I'm in a department meeting. I'm going to code switch when I'm around a family meal time with extended family. We all code switch day in and day out. And people who are adept at going in and out of different cultures tend to be adept at code switching. But at some point, and I think you probably saw this in the film, at some point there's typically friction, I mean, I've seen this several times, and every time I watch it, it's painful to watch her with her dad, right? I mean, it is an awkward presence that they have together, and it kind of breaks your heart because it just feels like they can't talk. I think she feels missed. I think he feels missed, meaning kind of invisible, like they're missing who I am here in the midst of this. So there is that, you can code switch, right? But there's kind of a tension sometimes that comes with feeling, are you ever really part? And so at the very end of the film, you see her get back on a subway, and she's sitting there, and she kind of has a little bit of a, I don't know if I belong. And she actually says that, right? I don't know if I belong there, if I belong here. Do we have anybody in the room who's a fan of Gloria Anzaldúa? Okay, well, if you should read her. She's amazing. So she actually, part of my background, I've done some certificate and scholarship in gender and women's studies. And so she wrote a book called La Bordera, which is Borderlands. And she talks about this experience as a Latina when she kind of left her community and went on to higher education. And so she finds herself very similar to the woman in the film, experiencing institutional culture and feeling quite different than the kind of normative culture on this college campus. And so trying to navigate tricky dynamics and kind of feeling like there was this whole other curriculum that wasn't in the classroom that she had to figure out, how do you do this? It's what a lot of first-generation college students feel, okay, or experience on college campuses. But then she writes about what happens when she went back to her community. And all of a sudden, similar to the woman in the film, she was different. She was kind of classified as, oh, well, you left, and you're different, and you're high and mighty now, and you're elite, and you're educated. And so she talked about the pain of kind of feeling that she was in the borderlands. That's what she calls it, the borderlands, which was that she's living now in this place between those two cultures where she can go in, she has residency in both cultures, but really she feels like she's kind of in the middle and that she doesn't really belong fully to either culture. And she doesn't know if she ever will. And I read that and it struck me as similar to some of the things I felt in other areas of life, right? So as a Christian woman, I came from a context where a lot of people in my family had children, didn't work full time, kind of saw it as crazy that we moved across the country, started a family, and yet I was still working full time. And so I would often talk about the struggle of wanting to kind of find a middle way, and is there a middle way? Spent a lot of time thinking about Jesus and how Jesus, in a lot of ways, navigated borderlands, right? So was able to hang among the religious elite in the day, but also hung out with those that the religious elite wouldn't dare be seen with, right? And so that sense of kind of being in the middle, and how do you navigate those different places? So I see that as something that is very real on our college campuses. And in fact, when I sit with a lot of first-generation college students, that's what they describe, is, well, my family doesn't really understand why I'm here, and I know I'm supposed to be here, but when I'm here, I don't feel like they really get me here, right? So there's a lot of that plays into many different dynamics on college campuses. What about this other question from that second film? Is there a way to reconcile this push to be all that you can be, kind of the American dream, right? Be all that you can be, keep on climbing, with the pull to stay true to your roots? What do we do with that?
I'm having this conversation because I am one of those.
Mm-hmm.
This is my first generation in college, and then I'm from Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
So I come here throughout this whole time, like semesters, and I don't see my whole family for the rest of the time.
Right.
And at first, it was really hard to feel that disconnect from them, because I definitely felt that disconnect from all that time spending and then seeing me as that. But I couldn't just stay in that weird borderland area. And so instead of distancing myself from it, I continued to like push to like what they were saying and like push to those moments and conversations where it really felt like really tense. But I was able to just take the leap of faith and say, hey, maybe they will understand it. And just like confess everything to them. And same with me being out here now, I can feel like I just can confess it to them and find my middle ground where I can be who I am throughout both areas.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're talking about being authentically you, regardless of physically or geographically where you find yourself, right? And that's courageous on your part, and I also think it requires a certain commitment on your part, but also a commitment to those communities that you find yourself in to engage that in a certain way, right? There's a hand over there. Mm-hmm.
And so I think, like, I definitely feel like the way that I've kind of like had to deal with that is by like kind of paring like down both like my roots and all that I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so like deciding what is it like what do I have for my roots that's like good and like helps inspire my character and is part of who I am and that I can like keep. And then what are like what out of like what I want to be and all of what I want to do, like purposing that, and not just thinking like I want to make a whole bunch of money and have a nice car or that kind of thing, but like why am I doing what I'm doing and like why am I studying what I'm studying in college and like what do I plan to do. And so instead of like being either one or the other, just kind of like taking the best out of both and like making that into who I want to be.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a lot of reflection in that process, right? It's a lot of kind of digging, who am I, why? It's analyzing those things.
I think family plays like a really important role in it too. Like what she was saying, if your family knows that it's important to develop who you are and that say you're passionate about a certain career and you have to go to a bigger city to pursue it. Like my sister's like that. If she loves finance and she's got to go to a big city to really pursue it to whatever end that she wants to pursue it. And it's actually been kind of cool to see how my parents have like realized that with her and have realized that this is a time for her to go push all that she can be, and while at the same time that she can come back home and like they're still welcoming. And my sister always says, she's like, I'm only gonna be gone for like a couple of years, like 10 years, 20 years. I want to move back because my parents make it so she wants to move back, but she still belongs there. And they still love her. Like, doesn't matter like where she's been. They're still. Like,
So maybe those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Maybe you can pursue your dreams and still have your roots, and there's a way to do that.
Has to do with the family that you're with, and, like having that atmosphere.
Yeah.
That really realizes.
Yeah, yeah. Stu.
I was going to say, I would agree with that, and I think that when we think about our institutions, that how much a person feels like they have to give up of who they are to be successful in an institution, it makes a big difference.
That's right. That's right.
And so as our institutions can become more welcoming and valuing the
Right.
values that people
Yeah.
are bringing with them from their
Validating that identity. Yeah.
sure, that
Yeah.
identity, whether it's based on language or values or customs or variety of things.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to have another period of discussion in a minute, but what I'm going to move us into is I love how the examples that you shared, and thank you for sharing those personal examples and stories from your families. I love how each of those reflections required you to think about kind of this authentically, well, who am I? And how did those different aspects of who I am impact how I experience something? And not only me, kind of centered in that, but who are the people around me that influence some of that? I'm going to pass out this worksheet called Class Consciousness. And this is an attempt to get you, because some of us have thought maybe more deeply about it, some of us haven't thought about this at all. It's one way to get you to start thinking about kind of your own class identity and how you enter this conversation. Please know that this is not an exhaustive list of like all characteristics that go into class. Clearly, we can't capture all of that, right? But I want you to answer the questions thinking about the last time, which might be now, that you lived in a family context. Now, I'm not going to put too many parameters on that. I want you to come up with what that means for you. Some of you may be living with family now. Some of you may have your own families where you're kind of the parental units. Some of you may be living among people you consider family. Get you one down here. Or some of you may say, well, I'm kind of in this college transient period of my life, and so you might want to think back to the last time you lived corporately as a family. Okay? So it doesn't have to be blood relatives. It's just people you would consider family. Okay, I'm going to bring us back together. Wrap up your conversations. This is my least favorite part about facilitating these is I hate interrupting good conversation. So I'm going to go off script a little bit because I think this is going to be valuable. If not, blame me. I would like for you to try to get with people from your institution. Okay? I mean, that kind of worked already right now. But there are more Westmonters in the room, right? I would like for you, and if you're one of the people that you say, I don't know if there's anybody else here, then come see me, and we'll put a little, like, mixed institution group together, okay? I'd like for you to get with people from your institution, and here's the questions I'd like for you to think about. I think it's more powerful if you can have this conversation with people who know the same context as you. The questions are, how would you characterize community at your institution? And to help prompt this out a little bit, here are some of the things. I want you to think about campus norms. Now, you're not going to get to all of these, okay? But this is meant to help prime your thinking a little bit. So is there an unwritten dress code on your campus? Does the college expect students to use their own computers and laptops? Are there ample opportunities for students without cars to get off campus? Or is your campus in an urban area where maybe there's public transit or something? What sort of activities does residence hall staff, and you could make that more than just residence hall staff, right? Maybe your student activities office, commuter student, whatever it is. What do they sponsor that require money? Certain clothing, food, those kinds of things. Do students feel ostracized when they have to work and can't attend those events? What language is used in the halls or in the classes? Are we cognizant of jokes or sneers that might be offensive? And then is your hall or friend group segregated, even unintentionally? Okay? So this is what I'd like for you to talk about with folks from your institution. So we might have to help facilitate this a little bit. So I'm going to ask, because you guys are all Westmont, and you might have to get up and get on the floor. Are we okay with that? Some people? Okay. I'm going to ask Westmont to kind of be here since there's a critical mass already. You lucked out. Where are all the Biola people? Okay, great. So Vanguard will meet back kind of there. There's kind of a Biola group here. Who else do we have in the room? APU? Okay, you guys are all kind of together. Anybody else? I'm going to ask you to pause just for a second. I'm going to send you right back to the conversation. But I want to let you know a little bit, and this won't be a surprise to any of you. So student development theory, my field is student development, higher education. Student development theory says that when students enter a campus culture that differs from their familial culture or however they grew up, whatever they would consider the culture they were part of before they got there, they tend to have 3 responses if those cultures differ in remarkable ways. One response is that they resist, okay? They completely resist. They just decide that they're not going to get super involved. Another response is that they may completely distance themselves from the culture from which they came. Both of those responses are problematic, right? And both of those are responses that as people who work in higher education, whether that's faculty or staff or administrators, we're usually trying to figure out, okay, we don't want either of those extremes. The healthiest approach to those differing cultures is to try to bridge those 2 cultures in meaningful ways. And I think that by virtue of being here and being the student leaders that you are on your campuses, you are the bridge builders. So I handed out this little half sheet of paper, 2 actually. One of them is references. So if you wanted to dig in to some of this and read a little bit more, those of you who love to dig into the learning, there's references there for you. The other one is how I'd like for you to spend these last few minutes. And let me say, this is a catalyst conversation. This is a starting conversation for you to have with others at your institution. You're not going to solve this in 3 minutes, right? But I'd like for you to engage this proactive approach to community sheet, which begins to say, okay, so of the things we've already talked about from that previous slide, what do you think some of the institutional biases might be? Okay, and then it asks you to start getting specific about what could you do on that little proactive approach to community. It asks you to specifically say, what could you begin to do in your institutional context to shift it just a bit? Okay, to be that bridge builder. So that's where we'd like to end today. I'll call time when it's 3 o'clock so you can get to your next thing, but sit with this conversation for a few more minutes and commit together. Maybe you say, hey, you know what we can do? We can have another chance to get together and talk about this and maybe bring some others into the fold. Okay, so sit with us for a few more minutes. I know they want you to be sure that you fill out that blue evaluation and then leave that here. You can leave that upside down on this table. Otherwise, keep talking and I'll call time in a few minutes, okay? Thanks. So my friends, it's 3 o'clock. It's 3 o'clock, so I want to be true to the schedule, and I'm gonna close this in prayer, all right, as kind of a way to commission this time. Gracious God, I thank you for the privilege of sitting together and diving into something that we don't often think a lot about. Thank you for the opportunity to think about our own pasts, our own pathways to where we are now, and about the different ways that others' stories intersect with our own. So God, I pray that this time that we've spent together in this room would just be a catalyst for further conversation. I pray, God, that you would give us eyes to see what's invisible all around us, that you would give us a heart to be those bridge builders, And God, would you give us a real sense, help us discern the ways that we can make change at our institutions, the questions that we can ask that will bring others into the fold, that will allow us to really pursue the full kingdom work that you desire of us. So God, I pray for the conversations that have started here, that they would take root, that you would give each of us nudges of accountability that would help us to continue these conversations and to bring others into the conversation that perhaps weren't here today. God, thank you for, the privilege of engaging in these dialogues over these few days. I pray, Lord, that these wouldn't just be rhetoric, it wouldn't just be thoughts that we have, but really that we would be proactive, that we would see ourselves as your agents of shalom in this world. So thank you for that privilege, Lord. May all that we do and say bring you honor and glory. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.